Hey y'all, what's good? And welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you guys so much. Let's remember to have healthy dialogue, be respectful to ourselves and to each other, and to challenge the argument and not the person. Let's get it. Hey everybody, I hope everybody is doing well. I want to read some notes that I made pertaining to the Shonda Vander case. I didn't realize that a lot of you had were unaware, I should say, of her and the case, the charges that she faced, and things like that. So I did go and do some research to just get some details that I felt were important, just to learn about Shonda um, and the allegations that she faced and have now been charged, or I'm sorry, convicted of. So, Shonda was born in Alabama and she grew up in foster care. Per her sister, they spent about 3 years in foster care. They were allegedly abused by both the biological parents as well as their foster parents. It is also alleged that after her mom passed, she started to have a sexual relationship with her stepfather. I don't know how true that is, so I'm just going to stick to it being alleged information. Her sister also reported that while they were in foster care, they were subjected to ice baths, all different types of abuse. They were forced to only have bread with milk and or water. And so I think this is some of the behavior that she mirrored with little Timothy. It is also reported by her sister Paige that Shonda became very enraged that Paige was pregnant out of wedlock and pregnant before her, and she physically assaulted her, causing her to have a miscarriage. So that's just a little bit of her background, the little bit of her childhood that I want to discuss. I am not going to dig any further as it relates to that. However, once I dug up that information, I did question whether or not Shonda had this insatiable need for attention and did it develop while she was in foster care. And I know some children who are abused, who are unfortunately products of the foster system, sometimes develop different ways to um, get attention from their loved ones or friends or just anybody who's willing to give them any type of attention. So a lot of them become combative and aggressive. They develop different personalities and oftentimes they lie and things like that. So I was just wondering, maybe she developed this need for attention while in foster care. Um, and also, did she develop the need to start to self diagnose? Like with the ADHD and the sensory disorders and the reactive hypoglycemia and things of that nature. Those are all undocumented illnesses that Shonda claimed to have. She also had a service dog with no undocumented illnesses. Now, I think, and I'm not too savvy on like different dogs, so don't come at me, but I believe the dog that she had was a Great Dane, and those are pretty large dogs. And so I'm thinking that she personally went to get a larger dog that is a more gentle dog. However, a large dog just to draw attention to herself. Um, Especially given the fact that she again does not have any documented illnesses or diseases, and so she definitely wouldn't need a service dog for that. Maybe an emotional support animal, but not a service dog. And I don't know if they're the same, so I'm not too I'm ignorant to how that works. But it just seems like that would be something that Shonda would do, given the fact that when she's cornered or when she wants some sympathy, she goes to the extreme. Hence, the vomiting on the stand, the hyperventilating when the police officers came, um, her behavior when she was being booked, and just different things like that. So, Shonda was eventually charged with open murder and first degree child abuse. She was arrested on July the 8th. Her son Timothy, who passed away, was 15 years old at the time of his death, and he only weighed 69 pounds. he died on July the 6th. So, when the police and the investigators did their investigation, they came to the conclusion that the abuse could have started around January of 2022, and that is when he was subjected to the ice baths, the restraints with shackles and zip ties. He experienced sleep and food deprivation and ultimately died from malnourishment and hypothermia. Um, Around that time, Shonda said that her husband, Adam, who has passed on, had a stroke and he had to leave the home because it was difficult for him to get around the home due to the stroke. And he was also in a wheelchair. So he went to live with his parents. Paul, her son Paul, we'll get into a little bit about him in a few minutes. But her son, little G, cooperated with investigators and basically outlined everything that was taking place in the house as far as the abuse that was inflicted upon Timothy. Now, Shonda, per text messages, went a great length to let her son, Paul, know that she did not want her son, G, to. Um, I guess, be made privy to the abuse that Timothy was subjected to. So she would always say, make sure G doesn't see it, keep him in his room. Don't let G see Timothy without any clothes on and things of that nature because Timothy was losing weight at a rapid pace. She did not want G to see any of the abuse that Timothy suffered. Um, Also, per the abuse, we know that Shonda was the one that orchestrated everything, but her son Paul carried out the abuse. And again, this was via starvation, excessive exercise, ice baths, physical abuse, verbal abuse, sleep deprivation, and starvation. The morning that Shonda found Timothy unresponsive in his room. She waited 20 minutes before calling the police. And so during the whole 20 minutes of that, she was trying to arouse him with water, with slapping his face, calling his name repeatedly. She called Timothy in the room to see what she should do. It seems as though she didn't respond the way I would say an average parent would respond with crying and hysterics and things of that nature. She was more so surprised that Timothy was dead and in denial. Now, Paul had told her, he made a remark, Mom, he's dead. And she just did not want to believe that, okay? Because I believe that she enjoyed torturing little Timothy. And I don't believe it was her goal to starve him or, sorry, to kill him. I think that she just liked being in control of his every move and him being submissive to her. So, um, again, Shonda was charged on July the 8th. Paul was arrested and charged on July 15th. Now, Paul was immediately taken to the police station and he spoke to the police officers and the detectives without an attorney present, which baffled me because his mom is an attorney. She's not licensed. However, she is very well abreast of the law and how it works. And so to me, that showed that she didn't care about Paul because why would you send your son to the police station without any type of representation? Now, when Shonda went to the police station, she made sure to call her father in law or whatever, and he is a licensed attorney. And so he was there to, speak on her behalf before she was booked into the jail. When Paul arrived to the police station, he was very much in denial. Um, he basically um, kind of parroted his mom's words as far as um, just telling investigators how Timothy was a handful to deal with, and he was very uncooperative, very needy. And he went on to tell investigators that he believed that his mother did love Timothy or whatever, and that she felt she was doing the best that she could do given the circumstances or what have you. And so the interrogators did press really hard for answers until Paul acknowledged how stressful it was for them to take care of Timothy and that, he acknowledged that he knew his mom had great disdain for Timothy. To me, Paul was someone who was easily manipulated by his mom. And I think the reason why is because he saw how much his mom didn't care for Timothy. And I think that he desired a deeper relationship with his mom, even though she was manipulating him. So, one of the things that was mentioned during Paul's interrogation and his time on the stand was how his biological father abused them physically, mentally, sorry, and verbally, and how Paul did have a job, but his father would take half of his check. He admitted to or testified that his father would cause them to or not cause them, he forced them to do wall sits and just things of that nature. And so I think that due to the abuse that he suffered with his father and being able to escape that and go to his mom, I think that he desperately wanted the love of a parent. And so he did what his mom told him to do. And I'm not saying that he doesn't know wrong from right. I really believe he does. And he admitted to, knowing what he did was wrong. But I just think the psychology of it, um, if we look at the psychology of it, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I'm just saying, just based off of what I observed from his interrogation and his time on the stand, I just think that he wanted the love of his mom. And so that meant doing anything that she told him to do, regardless of the circumstance. Um, also, I feel that, let me go to the second part of my notes. I think that Paul ultimately did love his mom, but I'm sorry, he loved his brother. And I think that he just disliked him and saw him as a burden. I think that Shonda treated Paul like a partner or a spouse instead of her son, and she depended on him to inflict punishment on Timothy. Okay. And that's made clear by the text message exchanges between the two of them. Okay, so if you look at Paul, at the time he was 19 or 20 and he had nothing but a phone. He still played with Legos, which just there's nothing wrong with. We all have our vices. We all have things that we enjoy doing or what have you. But so he depended on his phone, his Legos. He had an e-bike, no car. I don't even know if he had a license. And he was very active on social media on his TikTok account. And he only worked part-time. So you think 19, 20 years old. I remember when I was that age, I was finally free. I lived on my own or what have you. I worked two jobs. I had a social life. I was having a good time. You don't hear this from Paul. Okay. There's no mentioning of friends, a significant other. He didn't play sports. He didn't travel. He had no social relationships outside of his mother and his brother. And so I think with that, it just caused him not to like his brother, and he looked at his brother as a burden. And I believe that Shonda held Paul captive while she was able to go and complete her studies in law school. While took 6 months to study for the bar, she completed an internship and a clerkship, and she left Paul home to care for Timothy day in and day out. Even when Shonda went to bed at night, she relied on Paul to look after Timothy. So even after she came home from work, Paul was still responsible for Timothy. And so I believe this is what caused Paul to resent his mom and take it out on Tim. Now, we've all heard the saying that hurt people hurt other people. And we've also heard the saying that a lot of times when we're upset with something or someone, we'll take it out on the person that's the closest to us. I don't feel that Paul had the best relationship with his mom, but I do believe that at one point he had a great relationship with his brother Timothy, and I believe that with his resentment toward his mom caused him to take it out on Timothy, okay? Um, I also believe that he knew he could lie to his mom about Tim misbehaving and lashing out and faking and different things like that. And he knew that Shonda would allow him to punish Timothy. And I think that with that, Paul got great satisfaction out of that because he wasn't allowed to take it out on his mom. So I got permission to take it out on Tim. It's sick, I know, but that's just, what I came up with. Okay. So what else do I have written down? Um, I also learned that Timothy was punished by his mom for stealing toys. And so by that I mean that there was a time where I guess Timothy did not have like a TV or toys or anything like that. Even though he was 15 years of age, that's still a teenager. Teenage boys, um, they still play skateboard, biking, they have friends, watching TV, wrestling, things that teenage boys do. He was not allowed. And so it was reported that at one point Timothy had went and took a couple of Paul's Legos, and Paul was upset about it. And Paul at one point was building like this Lego masterpiece or whatever, and Timothy went and, broke a couple of the Lego pieces off, and it enraged Paul. And so he would get punished for that. Also, it was testified or reported that um, Timothy would go and sneak, quote unquote, sneak some of little G's toys. And, he wanted to play with them or just play with his brother. It was testified that Timothy would, quote unquote, steal food, and that at one point, Shonda reports or testified that Timothy had eaten a raw hamburger, raw bacon, chicken nuggets that were frozen. She claims that he would open like cans of food to eat, and he would get punished for that because she believed that he was sneaking it, and that he was not entitled to extra food. Um, and so to sum it all up, Shonda did what she could to try to hide Timothy from everybody. She testified that she did not allow little G's grandmother to come to the house because she didn't want her to see the state of the house. It was very messy. There were always dishes in the sink. It was just a mess. Clothes everywhere. She did not do laundry. She depended on Paul to do all of that for her. The neighbors reported that they were unaware that Tim lived in the home. Timothy did not go to the doctor's office. He did not go to any type of counseling. He did not ever see a dentist as long as he was in Shonda's care. And to me, I believe that Shonda felt that she had a strong desire to break Timothy, and all he wanted was his basic needs met. Okay, so she again wanted to control the narrative, how much he ate, when he ate. She controlled the frequency of his bathroom visits. He was only allowed 1 minute to urinate, 2 minutes for defecation. Um, she controlled what bed he slept in, what room he slept in. Oh boy, she just every aspect of his childhood, of his life, she wanted full control over, and Timothy was nothing but a burden to her, and it's evidenced by the remarks that she made to her son Paul, basically stating that Timothy would not win, and she always accused him of faking being autistic. And so that just sums up the research that I did. Um on Shonda. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that situation, but that just gives you an eye opener of some of the things that took place in that household. So now I'm going to pivot over to the sentencing. It's about 45 minutes long. And there are two victim impact statements from her two older children that are eye opening. So let me jump over to that portion.
We are on the record in file 23110FC. It's people of the state of Michigan versus Shanda Vander. Are you Shanda Vander?
Yes, sir.
All right, Ms. Vander appears before the court with her attorney, Mr. Fred Johnson. The people are represented by Matt Roberts. The date and time scheduled for a sentencing in this case. Have the people had a chance to read the pre-sentence report and the attached guidelines?
We have, Your Honor, we have no additions or corrections, although I have been advised by Mr. Johnson that he does have a number of corrections. We've discussed those over email. But for his objection to the restitution award, we have no objection to the corrections that he's seeking.
Okay, I did get an email from Mr. Johnson. I appreciate that. Why don't we just go through each objection just to make sure we have them all on the record, and then we'll inquire to Mr. Roberts whether or not he objects to that. So you may proceed.
May we start with the very first page one? First page one.
Okay.
As I know it. Under the personal history information, it notes that my client's educational attainment has been a bachelor's degree. We're asking the court strike that and insert the words Juris Doctorate.
Any objection, Mr. Roberts?
No objection.
Okay. And then just for probation notes, I'll, Ms. Anderson, I will send you, did you get a copy of the email?
I did not, Your Honor.
All right, I'll forward that to you just so you'll have it in writing exactly what all the corrections are. So, all right, go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
On page 2, the very next page, at the under the jail credit, it indicates that the dates that we're in question here are in July 7th, 2022 to January 19th, 2024, and we're asking the court to amend that to today's date, the second date, January 23rd, 2024.
Any objection, Mr. Roberts?
That checks out, Judge. That'd be 4 additional days, so 575 days.
Okay.
That
Court
is
will
our
change it.
position as well. Thank you. Let's see. Which one? Let me see. Judge, on page 2 of the interior of the document, the second page 2, on the let's see, 1, 2, third paragraph down, there's a request for restitution for $5,000 to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. We object to that request. We ask that the court disallow that request at this juncture. We haven't received any information to justify it, and we'd ask for a hearing if the court plans to proceed on that.
Mr. Roberts?
Your Honor, that request is made by the Department of Health and Human Services as compensation back to the Crime Victims' Rights Compensation Act. That fund did pay out some funeral expenses as a result of this, and the fund is entitled to seek compensation from the defendant in those cases. I think it would end up being joint and severally liable with Paul Ferguson as well if we get to that juncture with Paul Ferguson. But we do believe it is an appropriate award, and there is documentation from the state to indicate that award was paid out. So we would request that $5,000 be awarded.
Has Mr. Johnson been provided that documentation?
He may not have. I can
Okay.
forward those to him. So.
Mr. Johnson, would you prefer to just have the restitution portion reserved until you can receive the documentation? Then if you so choose, you can ask for a restitution hearing. I guess what would your preference be, or Mr. Roberts, what your preference would be? I mean, I can order it with the ability for Mr. Johnson to come in and ask for a hearing, but I guess it depends on what either one of you would like to do.
If I could just make a suggestion, I would prefer that in lieu of that, the only other thing I would ask that is if I can get the information to Mr. Johnson. My understanding is Ms. Vander has another matter which is being handled in front of a different judge at this time. That case is not going to finish today, and she will be here at least until tomorrow. But perhaps by then we can work out this restitution issue and just move forward that way with the court ordering it. And then if Mr. Johnson chose at a later time to challenge it, certainly you do have the right to do that through a motion.
Okay, yeah, what I'll do is, I mean, I think the paragraph in there saying that they're requesting restitution, I don't think there's any need to strike that in terms of ordering it. What I'll do is I'm going to order it with your opportunity, Mr. Johnson, to request a hearing. And obviously, if you want a hearing, we'll have a hearing on it. And if you don't, then it'll stand as ordered.
Thank you.
All right.
I'll provide Mr. Johnson the documentation we have as well. So you don't have to do that.
Okay. You can continue, Mr. Johnson.
Page 3, Judge, and this first one was not in the email that I sent to the court. This is when I was able to identify later on, and it's in the very first sentence. The first sentence read, "It is therefore recommended." I think there was intention that the words "there" and "for" be combined into "therefore."
Okay.
To make that correction.
Any objection, Mr. Roberts?
No objection.
All right.
On the third paragraph, under description of offense narrative, in the last line of the third paragraph, there were visible bruised on his chest. I believe it ought to have been bruises on his chest, and we'd ask to make that correction.
Okay.
No objection.
On page, if the court will go forward to page 5.
All right.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's a description of the plea negotiation for Paul Ferguson there. And while we don't object to what's stated, we would like to add language that, in addition to what's stated, that the appeal have agreed to fairly and fully inform the court. And I think that was testified to as part of the agreement.
That is accurate, Judge. No objection to that.
Okay. All right.
Okay. On page 7, under the heading of employment, under unemployed, then it says 17th Circuit Court. I believe the intention was to say 27th Circuit Court, Your Honor. That's where the employment was, in fact.
Yeah, I did see that. I think the 17th is actually Kent County, I believe. So it's the 27th Circuit Court. Any objection, Mr. Roberts?
No objection.
All right.
And Your Honor, we're asking the court to add to the employment that my client was also employed with the 14th Circuit Court as a law clerk as well.
January 2021 to August 2021.
January 2021 to August 2021, Your Honor.
Okay. Any objection, Mr. Roberts?
It's a fairly minor point, but I think technically that was an internship. I don't know if that qualifies as employment, but I'm not. If the court wants to put that in there, that's fine.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I mean, we don't differentiate between, I guess we can say rate of pay as an internship. I think that kind of will make sense to me. Any objection to that, Mr.?
That's appropriate, Your Honor. We'll support that.
Okay. All right.
And on that same page, Judge, under colleges, advanced degrees, the second one down, West Michigan University, Cooley Law School, under level completed, it says 3 years college, 4 years college, and it should be 3 years. And the area study should be law, not legal assistant.
Okay. Any objection, Mr. Roberts?
And certificate, I'm sorry, you're correct. Certificate should be Juris Doctorate.
Okay.
Okay, on the next page, page 8. And this also was not included in my original email, Judge, under mental health, where it says bipolar disorder.
Okay.
We now have the medications that's been prescribed. And I'm going to spell them for the record. The first one is Lamistol. Lamistol?
It's Lamictal C on it.
Okay. Lamictal.
Okay.
Lamictal. And it's spelled Vistari. T-I-L. Okay. Vistari. Visceral. And the treatment commenced in 2024.
Now, I have to break in here periodically. Basically, what they're doing is making sure that everything on the paperwork is written correctly. There is no room for error, okay? Because I highly believe that Shanda is going to try to file for an appeal, okay? That's just her personality. She feels as if she did nothing wrong. So, first and foremost, she wants everybody to know that she has a Juris Doctorate degree. She studied law. She graduated in 3 years instead of 4, okay? Which pisses me off because when she was on the stand, she couldn't remember this and that about Timothy, when such and such happened, the length of the time that it occurred, and different things of that nature. She says she had PTSD, she disassociates, and she forgets things. However, She doesn't want us to forget that she is a scholar. She doesn't want us to forget that she went to law school while being a quote unquote mother. She finished in 3 years instead of four. She graduated top 2 of her class, passed the bar exam on the first try. She did an internship, and that should count for something, okay, even though it was unpaid. And she also wants us to know that she was evaluated, and now she has a bipolar disorder. She is on Lamictal, which is an anti-epileptic and a mood stabilizer, and she's on Vistaril, which is an old antihistamine and is often used to help treat or I guess I say treat anxiety symptoms. There's nothing to treat anxiety. It just helps you through those symptoms, okay? Because you guys got to remember, she wanted us to know so desperately that she had some type of illness, okay? First, it was PTSD. She had reactive hypoglycemia, sensory disorder. But I find it mighty funny they didn't give you any type of medication for that. Okay. And I don't think she's bipolar either. I'm not a doctor, but I don't. I just think that she just needs some sympathy and she has to have all of it go back to her. She needs the attention. Never mind that we're here for Timothy. That doesn't matter. The focal point has to be on me. Okay. I am intelligent. I persevered. Look what I went through and look at what I've accomplished. But it doesn't matter now. It just doesn't matter. I guess she gonna maybe be a jailhouse lawyer. I don't know. Well, let's see.
Um, the third page one, the following page, under basic information, highest grade completed. It says bachelor's degree, that should be Juris Doctorate, Your Honor.
Okay. Any objection, Mr. Roberts?
No objection.
And thank you, and I have no additional corrections to make to the PSI.
All right. Any additions or corrections to the guidelines at all, Mr. Roberts?
No.
And Mr. Johnson? Any corrections or additions? Any corrections to the guidelines at all?
No, sir.
Okay. Any challenges to the guidelines, Mr. Roberts
No objection.
and Mr. Johnson?
No, sir.
All right, Ms. Vander, have you had an opportunity to review the pre-sentence report and the attached guidelines?
Yes, sir.
Any additions or corrections that you have?
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Roberts, I believe we have some individuals here who wish to make victim impact statements. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor. The two older siblings of Timothy Ferguson, with the exclusion of Paul, would like to make a statement.
Okay, they may come forward, and whoever wishes to speak first may go ahead and they can stay there. They can come to the podium. It's completely up to them. So,
It's Millie Ferguson who's going to be first.
okay. And just for the record, I think Ms. Ferguson actually wrote a letter as well, I believe. And
I believe it's included, yes.
yeah, I have read that's attached to the PSI, but she's certainly welcome to make a statement. Good afternoon, ma'am. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Can you please state your name for the record?
Millie Joan Ferguson.
All right, you may proceed. Go ahead, Ms. Ferguson.
Thank you. I'm Millie. I'm Timothy's youngest older sister. I'm 2 years older than him. One of my earliest memories I have was being taken away from my parents by CPS. My two older brothers rode in a car ahead of us, and me and Timothy rode together in the second car. And in every picture we have as a family, Timothy was always right by my side. We were the two youngest, the two smallest. We were the two that sat in the middle in the backseat car rides with the too small car. The last two to get hand-me-downs, the two that never had to worry about not getting homework help from an older sibling. He was always 2 years behind me, so every time I got to the next level in school, that's how many years I had to wait for him to follow along. When I was in 8th grade, he was in 6th, and there was a student in my science class that started talking about him, trying to start rumors. I stood up right as class was starting, as people were quieting down, and I shouted at him to never talk about my little brother. People could say whatever they wanted about me, I didn't care, but not about him, and never about him, because I was his big sister. It was my job to protect him. I like to say I don't regret things in my life, that every mistake I've made has made me who I am today, but when Timothy died, I couldn't stop regretting. I regret not hugging him more and teasing him so much instead of telling him that I loved him every once in a while. I regret not putting aside my differences with Shanda and Paul just to check in on him. I regret not dancing with him the last time I saw him at our brother's wedding. These are the things that I can't remedy now. There's no fixing what's been done. No way to redo it all over again. And that's my regret. That I couldn't protect him when he needed me most. Timothy was so smart. He could take anything apart with any tools, or none at all. He had trouble focusing, but when he did, he was just as smart as the rest of his class. He made people angry, yes, but then he would look at you with those big baby blue eyes, and you could never stay mad at him. It took me 6 months of therapy after he died to even properly feel the emotions of his death. And I'm still in therapy today. I've been trying so hard since he passed away just to try to let people know of him, let people know that he was loved, that there are people out there grieving for him. I'm here today for him because I was asked to speak for him, because I was given a victim impact statement for him instead of a witness one, because the victim of this crime can't speak for himself. I knew him his whole life. I held him the day he was born, and I continued to try to hold his hand as long as he was by my side, until he wasn't. I want the woman who killed my little brother to face the highest punishment possible. I want her detained for the rest of her life so she can't hurt anyone else. And I want the world to know that Timothy was wanted, if not by her, then by me. He was loved by me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson.
Nolan Ferguson will be next, Judge.
We're gonna take a little break. That was very heavy. It was very heavy. I read some things that happened to the children when they were younger, and I refuse to repeat them. But I am so glad that Millie found the strength to speak for her brother. And I did learn that she is in counseling, and I think she's studying psychology. And I don't know if you guys noticed when she walked past Shanda, she kind of put her hand up so she didn't have to look at her. But I did notice when she addressed the court, she looked her mother dead in her face, and her mother, being the coward that she is, did not look up. All right, so now we're going to hear from, I think the older brother's name is Nolan.
Yeah, could you please state your name for the record?
I go by Nolan. My full name is Eric Nolan Ferguson Jr.
Go ahead, Mr. Ferguson.
I am Timothy's oldest brother, and unfortunately the oldest child of Shanda Vander. I live with my wife 900 miles from here, and in July of 2022, I was working 60-hour work weeks, trying to build a career when I received a phone call that I never thought I would get. My baby brother Timothy was gone. For 2 days, I reeled with no explanation until I was informed that our own mother was in jail for his murder. Somehow, making an entirely unexpected and deeply awful situation worse. I thought that things were different than when I was younger. I thought my mother had changed for the better. Not one day has been easier since then. I've had to leave my career behind. My wife has to watch helplessly as I struggle day in and day out, wondering how none of us knew what was going on, wondering if I told Tim I loved him enough times for him to remember up until the very end. I have to wake up every day and pretend that I am who I was before Timothy died. I have to pretend to be Nolan so that my friends and coworkers and family won't worry about me more than they already do. I'm surrounded by people who love me and care about me, but not a single person besides my sisters who understand how hard it is. Timothy wasn't surrounded by people who loved him when he died. And if I had known that, Nothing could have stopped me from rescuing him and holding him in my arms and telling him I love him, that his big brother's got him, just like I did the day he was born. But because of Shanda Vanderark's actions, I instead got to cradle the bag of his ashes in my arms, just like I did the day he was born. In all my life, I only knew one thing that my little brother didn't like. He hated goodbyes. If he had to say goodbye to anyone, he would cry, and he would hold you, and he would say, "Don't go." But now I'm the one crying, but I never got to say goodbye. I will always love Timothy like I always have, and it kills me to think about. But I know he loved even his abuser and killer up until the very end, because unlike me, that's all he was capable of: love. I, on the contrary, want to stand here and express the anger and hatred that I feel, but if I'm honest, all that's just a mask, a bandage I try to put over the hole in my heart that was reserved for Timothy, but is now just filled with pain and remorse for every hug, high five, and I loved you that I might have missed in the time that I had with my sweet baby brother. So now I turn to the justice system in hopes that in addition to serving the maximum penalty, that there will be no appeals or second chances. If I can't have my brother back, she shouldn't have her freedom back. And lastly, I want everyone to know that to those who knew him, even that wouldn't feel like justice. Because the life of one sweet little blue-eyed boy is not equivalent to that of a murderer.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. That's right.
Now, when I watched this the first couple of times, um, the first time you listen to something, you're listening, but you can't absorb all of it, right? And so the second time, you're a little bit more attentive. And I think by the third and fourth time, you're starting to kind of break it down. And I can only imagine how Nolan and Millie feel, almost as if it's their fault, because at one point, all of the children were in custody of the state. And Paul and Timothy were living with their biological father. And Nolan and Millie, I think, were still in foster care. Um, Timothy lived with Shanda. Paul graduated high school and went on to live with Shanda. However, Nolan and Millie were given the opportunity to have, and I don't want to say normal lives, but lives, right? And so I can only imagine how they feel knowing that while they were in school and thriving and healing, Nolan was able to graduate college and marry and start his own family. Millie now, I think, is in college. And all the while, their brother was suffering and starving and being tortured and beaten and abused. Yeah.
Thank you, Judge. I want to preface this by saying that those of us involved in the justice system, including the defendant, know what sentence the court is going to impose here, at least for that first-degree murder charge. And it is a sentence which is as warranted in this case as ever there was a case. That life without parole is the only sentence that Ms. Vander Ark should receive. I wanted to stand here for two reasons. I wanted to stand here, up here at this podium, next to Millie and next to Nolan as they gave their statements for two reasons. One, to show that we support them, that we support whatever statement they wanted to make here today. But I also wanted to see Ms. Vander Ark. She didn't look over her kids once. Not once during this entire process did she look over at her children. And that speaks volumes, because this case has always struck me that it's impossible as a parent, let alone as a human being, to understand the depths of the depravity that it took for us to come here today. All of the things that she did, or all of the things that she withheld, or all of the things that she directed her other son to do, are so so callous and so cold that they just defy explanation. And I convinced myself that the only thing that could make any sense is that on some level, she had stopped thinking of her children as human beings. And frankly, her not looking over and not even wanted to express some type of emotion or some type of remorse or some type of recognition of those two older children that she had a hand in raising and who spoke so eloquently and so beautifully and so passionately here today, just reflects what I guess we already feared and already knew about Ms. Vander. By a long margin, this case has been the most difficult case that I've ever worked on as a prosecutor. There are a few people that have had any contact with this that wouldn't say the same thing, whether it's police officers, whether it's the first responders, whether it's the paramedics or the firefighters who were on the scene, who all needed counseling to get through it, to the prosecutors that have looked at this, to the other attorneys that have looked at this, to anyone you talk to. Nobody can look at this and understand any of this. And certainly nothing in Ms. Vander Ark's testimony, we know it wasn't persuasive for the jury, and nothing in her testimony can provide any real insight into what was going on here. Again, other than what I feel is the conclusion here is that her children were just not people to her, that she just stopped thinking of them as that. They were, certainly Timothy was just an obstacle to her. He was a challenge that she was going to win. She was not going to let Timothy win. And she said it over and over again in the text messages. And it's just unfathomable. Again, I know the court has no discretion to impose, and we certainly welcome and stand wholeheartedly behind the court here having to impose the life without parole sentence. But I would say this, the court does still have some work to do because it does have to impose a sentence for that first-degree child abuse case. And as the court is aware, and we've not contested the guidelines in this case, they call for a minimum sentence of between 135 and 225 months. But I submit to the court, if ever there was a case where the guidelines don't even come close to reflecting the charge, it's this case. If not this case, then I can't even fathom what case it would be. Even with the offense variable scored at nearly double what would be necessary to maximize that score, that still doesn't even scratch the surface of what this woman did. I don't know, frankly, what number to suggest to the court. For years, I practiced in front of Judge Hicks. I know that Your Honor did as well. And Judge Hicks would frequently throw out numbers when he was discussing the discretion that the court has for life offenses, to throw out just numbers that just seem ridiculous. They don't seem ridiculous in a case like this. They just don't. Because nothing, again, can touch what this case was. Nothing will bring Timothy back. We all know that. We can't escape that tragedy. That the time for that has passed. But I would ask the court to send a message here that reflects how heinous, how callous, how cold, use whatever adjective you want to describe these actions, that even for that first-degree child abuse case, that's what this sentence should reflect. And those guidelines just don't even come close. So I leave it in the court's discretion here, and again, knowing that despite what decision it makes on that charge, it has no discretion with the life without parole sentence. And the only solace I take away from this, and I hope all the relatives and all the loved ones and all the people that care about Timothy know that the only thing we can do at this point, and the only thing this court should do at this point, is to make sure that Ms. Vander Ark never sees a day of freedom again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Johnson, any allocution on behalf of your client prior to sentencing?
Yes, Your Honor, if I may. Very few people, I think, in this courtroom have the experience of going into a jail to meet your client for the first time. I know Your Honor has. And it's a strange feeling to go in there, because usually when we go in there, Judge, we've read a police report, and in some of those cases it describes something just horrible, just terrible things happen. And we go into those jail cells and we see this client, and we're looking because we're expecting to see horns in the tail and the pitchfork. That's what is being described. We get in there and we see just a person who is now facing jeopardy due to the worst thing that she's ever done in her life. And whatever else has made this person that way is not in the guideline scores. In my client's case, Judge, as you've read the pre-sentence and the people have read it and it's been admitted, her biological father, my client's biological father, died when she was 8 years old. And he also sexually and physically abused her, which means he began before she turned 8. And as the court is aware, we don't catch these guys the first time, and especially when force and violence is used, they can hide their transgressions for years. Once this man is out of her life, another man comes into her life, her stepfather, who does the same thing until she's old enough to move out of the house. The court is also aware that my client has also had the burden of mental health issues. And quite frankly, the reality is when people are conditioned to believe that that's the sort of treatment that they deserve by their father and their stepfather, and their mother's not going to protect them, they tend to seek out that sort of abuse in the spouses. So the abuse continues all through the youth of her life until she finally frees herself with this man. And what does she do when she frees herself? Without resources, she has no wealth. Without resources, she puts herself through college. She puts herself.
Now, I don't like to go against defense attorneys because oftentimes they are not left with much to work with. In this case, I have to disagree with him though, because even though Shonda allegedly had to endure some pretty tough stuff, horrific things, I won't take that away from her. And I'm not here to judge that part of her life. I'm not, or critique it. But to me, it would have benefited her more that instead of going to law school and racking up 6 figures, to find other resources to heal yourself. Once your children were hauled off by CPS, that should have been an eye opener for you. And if you decided at that point that you didn't want to be a mom, if you felt that other people were suitable to care for your children, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you for that because to me, that shows that you're selfless in this situation, right? You made a mistake. Your children were taken into safety. And the good deed would have been for you to just leave them alone. Instead, you felt that you had something to prove. So, no, I don't agree with him. I don't agree with him because law school for her was self soothing. It didn't benefit her children whatsoever. That was something that she chose to do for her. She didn't worry about anybody else. She didn't give a damn about those children ever, ever. Mm-mm.
Herself through law school. She not just puts herself through. She's second in her class in college, and she's second in her class in law school, and she has with 8 books from school, which she's jokingly told us twice when her stepfather had. They talked about things. She goes on and she provides a home for her 3 children and her ailing husband while going to school full time, while being a mother full time, while working full time. She does all these things.
She was not a mother full time. Paul looked after Timothy. She didn't look after little G. Paul did. I don't even know if little G went to school. She didn't provide a house. I mean, I'm sorry, a home. It was a house. They had shelter, yes, but that was not a home. There was no love there. She didn't prepare home cooked meals. She didn't do laundry. Hell, she didn't even sweep the floor. She provided no love. Okay. And then that leads me to wonder. I learned that she met her husband online, and I think he already had a disability. I think. I don't want to speak incorrectly, and he is deceased. But I think Shonda thrived off of having people who needed her. She needed people to need her, but she wasn't a good provider at all. I said this before in another video. I can't remember which one because I've made tons of videos. Okay. I can't remember everything, so don't get mad at me for saying this. But forget it. I forgot what I was gonna say. It'll come back. But let's just keep going. It'll come back to me because I had something profound to say, but maybe God didn't want me to say it. So let's move on.
But she makes a mistake. She makes one decision she shouldn't have made. She says yes. She has no criminal history. I couldn't find a speeding ticket. She raised dogs. She did Herculean stuff. When she got that phone call telling her that Timothy is either going to come to her or he was going to go into foster care, she says yes. Had she said no, I already have a house full of people I can't afford. We don't have the resources. Had she said no, my husband's sick. I have a 20-year-old son who's still living off us, sleeping on the couch. Had she said no, Timothy would be alive today. And he would probably be in the loving care of a foster family, right? Someone who could take care of kids with special needs. Had she said no, with her academic backgrounds, and quite frankly, given the fact of she has a relative in the legal profession who's highly regarded in the profession, she would now be practicing law and probably be doing very well at it, given her academic abilities. But she didn't say no. She did what moms do. So that's my boy, my baby. I'm taking him home and I'm bringing him into the house. She brought him in knowing that she shouldn't have him there because she doesn't have custody. She brought him in knowing that she couldn't get him into schools and get him in the medical because he didn't.
Okay, so that's a moot point, sir. Mm-mm. So basically, she's a lawyer that broke the law. She knew she didn't have custody. She carried him over state lines, a minor. That's a felony, isn't it? You should have just said you didn't have nothing else to say and sit down because this is not working. She should have said no and let that baby go to foster care. End of story. End of story. And y'all probably thinking that's harsh. And it probably is, but you know what? He will probably still be here. So she didn't do what moms would do. A good mom would sit and evaluate. A good mom would ask for help. A good mom wouldn't torture her son. A good mom wouldn't take a pizza roll and put it in front of the child knowing that he hasn't had a good meal in 6 months and pull it away when he tries to eat it. A good mom isn't going to make her son sleep on a tarp, a cold piece of plastic where she knew he was incontinent that he would defecate on and urinate on. A good mom is not going to prepare ice in advance for ice baths. A good mom isn't going to uh, put her son in a position where he's going to be sleep deprived and handcuff him and put monitors and sensors on him when he's walking through the house. Mm-mm.
Didn't have custody. Her ex-husband was not going to assist her in that. She brought him in knowing she wasn't going to get any more financial assistance. It wasn't her intention for us to be here. It was never her intention. Something broke. If if she said no, or if we wouldn't be here, something broke. Judge, this case makes no sense to anybody. There is no gain for her from this conduct. And again, if the court heard the transcripts of those emails, those text messages, she and Paul are unaware of the damage. They don't see it. How could you not see it?
That's not true. Paul sent a picture via text message to Shonda, letting her know how small Timothy had gotten. She was very well aware. She was very well aware. Hence the locks on the refrigerator, on the freezer, on the cabinets. She didn't even allow the baby to go upstairs on his own. She was well aware. Stop it.
See it because something's broken. There's no specific intent here. There's no intention. Her intention was to mother her kids like she did the other two children that were in her home. So that was her intention. Her intention was to provide, as she did with the other two kids. You don't see this with the other children. This is just something about this boy and this woman broke. 30 years ago, we didn't know about postpartum depression. 20 years ago, we didn't know about postpartum psychosis. Someday, somebody's going to tell us what's wrong with this woman and why anyone will be capable of what she did. Someone's going to explain it.
So you telling me she only had postpartum psychosis with one child? No. Mm-mm. I'm gonna leave that alone. Mm-mm.
400 years ago, we burned people like her at the stake because the bloodlust was there. And that's what made people feel better. And that was their solution to a horrible situation. Well, there is Mr. Roberts' description of this offense. Nothing's inaccurate. Nothing he said do I disagree with. But I think you have to add in the part that something's wrong here. Something's wrong here. And even if we can't put a label on it, we all know it. This is her. Timothy was her blood son. This wasn't some child. This wasn't a financial gain. This wasn't a stranger. This was her blood. She gave birth to this boy. And yet she was able to do what she did. Something's broken. The human mind just its capacities and its reasonings. I don't claim to understand, but we can look at her life before then and the circumstances, and they come together. And unfortunately, Timothy is the victim of it. That we get that. But the idea that this is premeditated or she intended, they found the video showing she was surprised. She was surprised when he passed. Something's amiss, and I'm asking the court to respond to that reality. The easiest thing would be to exceed the guidelines, but I'm asking the court to do the hard thing, and that is to respond to reality. This is a person who, if she had said no, 10 years from now she'll be practicing law, and people will be asking her to come and speak to high schools to talk about how you overcome what you've overcome, the mental health issues, the abuse from man after man after man. This was a survivor and a person who pulled herself up by her own bootstraps, no resources, all on her own, all her effort. This is what she's done as well. And it's unfortunate. It's horrible for Timothy. And it's horrible for her. But at the end of the day, we're not looking at evil, we're looking at sick. And I'd ask the court to apply that standard. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Vander, do you wish to say anything prior to sentencing?
Now, she was okay when they were going over, the paperwork or whatever, and she wanted to make sure that all of her accolades were on file, okay, in detail. Everything was spelled correctly. She wanted us to know that she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and being treated. Her two precious children went up to speak. She didn't look at them, no eye contact, didn't even acknowledge that they were there. But now, but now, she's sitting here crying, wanting sympathy, wanting some type of validation because in her mind, she feels she didn't do anything wrong. She wants us to give her a pat on the back for going to rescue her son, but she did that illegally. Okay. She doesn't want to talk about how that was illegal. She doesn't want to talk about how this baby needed treatment. He didn't go to the doctor. He didn't go to school. He was possibly SA'd. She doesn't want to talk about all of the torture that that baby endured. But she wants us to acknowledge what she endured as a child. But you're an adult now. You're in your 40s. It is so vitally important for us to understand when we need help and how to get help, right? I don't feel sorry for you for overlooking the trauma that you neglected to get help for. I don't. I don't. That's not a valid excuse for me. Okay. If you know in your mind you are not well, it is your responsibility to get help. No one else's. You're not going to blame your children for that. Because at the end of it all, children look to their moms and their dads for guidance, love, support, shelter. They're not going to walk up to you and assess your mental ability, your mental capacity to determine if they should ask for love that day. They just know it's supposed to naturally come from you despite what you're going through. A child is not astute enough to say, well, my mom's not doing well mentally, and so I won't bother her today. It's not in them to do that. That's your job as an adult. So, again, if you know you weren't in the right headspace to be a mom, then don't be a mom. It's just that simple. It is. It is. We don't like hearing the truth, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. She knew that she wasn't capable of being a good mom. There was a point in her life where she didn't have any of her children, and she probably did do well. And she should have stayed that way. You should have left the children where they were. And if you wanted to go to law school and be successful in all of those things, fine. I'm not judging you at all. But for you to be selfish instead of selfless and go and get your son, knowing that he was autistic and he needed a little extra love, and for you to be too selfish to give it to him, and instead you torture him the way that you did, and then you brainwash your older son to help you with that and prohibit him to have a life as a young adult. Okay. And another thing, you weren't too traumatized to the point where you couldn't go and try to better yourself via education. College is already tough, but then you throw in law school. Law school will break anybody, but somehow you conjured up enough strength and enough mental ability to go there every day. During COVID, you went on your iPad. I've seen your YouTube channel. You went and got a service dog, okay, to be there for you. But in the meantime, you let your son go without everything that he needed to make himself a better person. So now we're playing a sympathy role, y'all. She's wiping her nose. She wants all of us to feel sorry for her because of what she had to overcome and take the attention off of Timothy, who didn't even have a chance.
Well, first and foremost, for the individuals here to speak on Timothy's behalf, I appreciate you being here. It kind of struck me throughout the trial who was here for Timothy. And at one point in time, I worried that we may not have anyone to give a victim impact statement. And that to me made me very sad, quite frankly, horrified more than anything, but quite sad. And I'm happy that two individuals took time to be here from miles across the country. And out of the horrible situation, that makes me feel a little bit better. Not much, but a little bit better. Mr. Johnson makes the same argument today that he made at the trial, that this was just negligence. This was her not understanding what was going on. She was really trying to do the punishment. She was trying to be a good parent, and she just didn't realize that Timothy was in such a horrible condition. And I found myself, especially during closing argument, quite frankly, finding myself almost believing that. And afterwards, after the trial, I sat in my car after leaving that day, trying to understand, why I could feel that way. And what I realized is that I wanted to feel that way because I didn't want to accept the reality of the situation here. And the reality of the situation here is that this person, Ms. Vander, you intentionally engaged in these acts. This wasn't negligence. This is not understanding why, but you intentionally did this with a goal. And I think Mr. Johnson's correct. I don't believe there was an intent to kill here, because you would have lost the very thing that you wanted to torture. Without him, you have no one to torture, except maybe the younger children. So I don't believe you intended to kill him. I think you intended to continue on torturing him for as long as you possibly could. The why, I don't know. But all the information that I have in front of me, and I sat down, I really thought about this, and I looked over my notes from the trial, demonstrate that this wasn't negligence. This wasn't you not understanding what was going on. You look through, I read through every single text message of the exhibit, 2,000 plus pages, to try to understand what the heck was going through your mind. And what became entirely clear to me is that you knew exactly what you were doing. Immediately afterwards, when police arrive at the home, you immediately concoct this lie about he's been on a hunger strike. He was in the bed and I checked on him and I gave him some food and all this stuff. You got Paul involved in it. At one point in time, put baggy clothes on him. Put clothes on him to make sure, I guess, that he looks like he was actually wearing them, that he was hiding his poor condition, even though you already received text messages, weeks earlier of how bad he looked. You testified yourself how highly intelligent you were. In fact, that's the only thing that you testified to that I think was actually true. You were quite proud of that, boasting how intelligent you were. And not only that, but your actions in hiding this child. You hid him from his grandparents. You made sure that your other son, G, or little man, as you call him, didn't see him. Those text messages talk about not wanting anyone to see him. I want to see him in that condition. You made sure that the garage was closed. When you sent him out there with no pants on to clean out the garage. I don't want to believe it because I don't understand. I can't wrap my mind. I've been trying now for this entire case to wrap my mind around about how somebody could do something so horrific, not only to another human being, but to their own child. I'm a father myself. I love my kids. I love them with unconditionally. But quite frankly, there's a mother's love that I've seen that is striking. And anybody who's a parent who's married, most mothers, not all, but most mothers have such a strong love for their children. And to see what you did to your own child. I don't know if there's a word in the English language to describe how to describe it. The only thing I can come up with is just horrific. You intentionally and systematically tortured this child. And let's call it what it is. It's torture. You tortured this child. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't trying to curb his behavior. You tortured him. You monitored him obsessively. You all the things you did. I looked through every one of the messages: bread with hot sauce, wall sits, up and down the stairs, sleep deprivation, ice baths, making him puke up food, monitoring his bathroom time, giving him 60 seconds in the bathroom if he went to urinated, or 5 minutes if he had a bowel movement. You made him sleep in the closet. You threatened us to make him sleep in the garage. You put Tabasco directly in his mouth. You made him put his hands over the head. Made him work in the garage with no pants. And there's two other things that didn't come out in the trial that were in the messages. One, that there was talk of blindfolding him, depriving him of his physical sight as a punishment. And the last thing that struck me is just absolutely horrific in terms of your thinking. There was mentioning of giving him salt water as a punishment. One of the text messages talks about, hey, tell Paul or tell Tim that I'm not going to do the saltwater punishment. And your reasoning for not punishing him was that, oh my God, we can't get him salt water, that could hurt him, that could kill him. But it was because you didn't want to give him another excuse to sit down on the toilet because he'd have diarrhea. He'd have diarrhea, and so he would have an excuse to sit down for a few more minutes while he was diarrhea from salt water. That was your excuse. That was your justification, not that it would hurt him. And you did so for what? Because of some punishment. You wanted to regulate his food, even though you yourself testified that he didn't really gain a lot of weight. Toward the end of these text messages, you and Paul are talking about not wanting him to win. He's not going to win. I didn't allow pictures to be shown in open court of Timothy as he was when he died, because I didn't want people to remember him like that. Of all the things you took away from him, one thing I didn't want you to take away from him was at least some shred of dignity. And then I also thought, well, I'm a judge. I'm a human being. I don't know how to write this wrong. We try to do that. I try to do that from the bench every day. There's no way to write this wrong except impose a sentence that essentially takes away your freedom. And I thought to myself, what do I do? And I will tell you this. I'm choosing not to remember your son dead, looking like a Holocaust victim, but I'm choosing to remember like that. And you can't even look at him. That's how he was. A beautiful child with a lot of life in his eyes. That's who your son was. And you took that from him. I'm choosing to remember him as a happy individual with life, not as an individual. And that's the picture I want people to remember of your son. You took that from him. You took it from him. For what reason, I don't know. Mr. Johnson's right. There is something broken in you. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't negate what you did here. So besides remembering him like that, I'm not going to let you hide in the darkness anymore. People know what you are now. They know what you did. You're not able to hide in the darkness anymore. Timothy won. And he won because we know what you did to him now. It's not hidden anymore. We know who you are. That's the way that I'm going to honor him. You don't win because justice, thank God, in this case prevailed. I can't even imagine if you had been able to resuscitate him, he'd be still suffering. So if there's anything I'm grateful for, would be that he finally passed away, so you couldn't continue to torture him. You did. It's a sentence of the court. First, as to count 2, child abuse in the first degree. Court sentences you 50 years to 100 years in prison. Credit for 575 days. Court is exceeding guidelines in this case. The court finds that the amount of torture that I've indicated in terms of the long-term suffering that Mr. Ferguson, Timothy went through justifies on a reasonable grounds to depart from the guidelines. The used to be the standard was the guidelines. If the guidelines didn't take into consideration all the elements, I don't think they would take into consideration the amount of absolute systematic, consistent torture that you engaged in here. I think that's enough reasons to justify departing from the guidelines. There's a $68 state cost, $130 crime victim rights assessment. As to count 1, felony murder. It's a sentence of the court. You serve a term within the Michigan Department of Corrections for the rest of your natural life without parole. Again, there's credit for 575 days that you've already served. There's a $68 state cost. The crime victim assessment fee has already been assessed, and the court is going to assess a $450 public defender fee. Ms. Vander, you have a right to file an application. You have a right to file an appeal. Request for this, if you are unable to afford an attorney, one will be appointed to a public expense. Request for assistance of a lawyer must be made within 42 days from today's date. Clerk is handing you a form that you must complete. Return to the court in that 42 days. Mr. Roberts.
Judge, just briefly, I believe you did indicate you would order that $5,000 in restitution.
Oh, I did. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. The court will order $5,000 in restitution at this time to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, with the caveat that Mr. Johnson, you can certainly, if after the documentation, you can certainly ask for a restitution hearing and to contest that amount.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else for the record, Mr. Roberts?
No, thank you, Judge.
Mr. Johnson?
No, sir.
All right, we're adjourned.
So the $5,000 for the restitution fees are, how can I explain it? So when Timothy died, the state paid for his funeral. And so the state is requesting or demanding that Shanda be made responsible for paying those fees, which is in the amount of $5,000. She doesn't believe that she should have to pay those fees. And so her attorney is going to file a motion for a restitution hearing. This particular video didn't show it, but at the end of the hearing, Shanda looked up at her lawyer and she basically said that that's going to kill me for ordering stuff. So basically, what she meant by that is that if she is required to pay back the $5,000, the state can go into her commissary and take from that. You may remember hearing that with the Darrell Brooks trial when he was ordered to pay back restitution. I believe that the state, and I think it varies from state to state, so I'm not sure what the exact percentage is that they can take from her commissaries and her books and things of that nature. But if based on what happens during the hearing, she will be responsible for paying back their restitution, and they can, like I said, deduct that from her commissary. And so again, selfish Shonda uh basically feels like if you're taking my money, then I won't have, monies to, buy my knickknacks and whatnot and, toiletries and everything else that prisoners are responsible for purchasing. But I want to thank everybody who showed up and who was able to stomach this case. I know it was very heavy. Child abuse cases are never easy, but I felt it necessary to shed some light on little Timothy. And I hope he is resting well in the arms of God. That poor, precious baby. Um, yeah. And so that's all I have to say. I thank everybody. And I'll see y'all on the next one. Take care. Thanks for watching. Y'all leave me some comments and let me know what you think. As always, y'all be easy. Peace.